For 90 days, she endured the cruelty of a woman who treated her like she was invisible. Until that woman invited her to a charity gala, as a joke. As a way of mocking her. She had no idea she had just invited the woman who owned 12% of her husband's empire. Marcella Dorrance was on her hands and knees, polishing Astrid Selma's imported French marble, when she caught her own reflection in the stone beneath her. Distorted. Broken into fragments. 26 years old. Daughter of Emeka Dorrance, the man whose name had built oil pipelines across 3 continents. Heiress to a fortune that could swallow this entire mansion whole. Playing Maid. Then Astrid's voice cut through the hallway like crystal shattering on tile. You left a smear. She didn't even glance down. Just floated past in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and casual cruelty, ice blonde hair pinned flawlessly, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something that wasn't Marcella. But somehow still felt like it was. Then she stopped. The ghost of a smile curled at her lips. Oh, Anne, I'm hosting a charity gala on Saturday evening. You should come. Marcella looked up. Astrid's smile was a knife wrapped in silk ribbon. Wear something presentable. It'll be charming. Watching you try to fit in with real people. From the sitting room doorway came soft laughter. 3 of Astrid's friends. Designer handbags, fresh manicures, the kind of boredom that always needs an audience. Marcella returned to the floor. Said nothing. But in her mind, she was already deciding. Not the sapphire Valentino. Not the sequined Balmain. The custom-structured teal Dior she'd had commissioned in Paris last spring. Understated. Impeccable. The kind of dress that didn't try to impress, because it didn't need to. And then there was the car. 3 months earlier, Marcella had walked through an employment agency door in a plain cotton dress. No jewelry. No makeup. Her natural curls tucked beneath a modest head wrap. She carried a second-hand tote bag and wore the expression of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. The agency coordinator looked at her application twice. Miss Dorrance, this is a housekeeping role. Live-in. Minimum wage. I'm aware. What the coordinator didn't know, what no one in the world knew, was that Marcella had spent 4 months engineering this exact moment. Her father's name opened every boardroom in Lagos, Nairobi, and Dubai. But she had grown up watching what happened to people who inherited power without earning it. They became soft. Entitled. Hollowed out by comfort. She refused to be a trophy version of her father's legacy. She needed to know, truly know, whether she could build something from nothing. With her own hands. In a country where no one knew her name. And there was one more reason she'd chosen this household specifically. Her investment team had flagged something. Her quietly growing portfolio had a stake in Seoul Capital Ventures, which had silent exposure to Min Jun's hotel group. Numbers that had questions attached to them. Inconsistencies that wouldn't resolve on paper. If her money was connected to this family, she would see them up close before she decided what to do about it. She requested the file. Read it over a weekend. Then booked a one-way flight. The mansion sat behind iron gates on a tree-lined street where the houses didn't need to announce themselves. No ostentatious pillars. No gold fixtures visible from the road. Just space, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, which Marcella had learned long ago was always the more expensive kind. She was shown to a small room on the 3rd floor. Single bed. One window facing the garden. A shared bathroom at the end of the hall. She set her bag down, sat on the edge of the mattress, and felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. She met Astrid Selma Min on the 3rd day. The woman descended the main staircase at 11 in the morning in a silk robe the color of heavy cream, phone in one hand, coffee cup in the other, with the unhurried movement of someone who had never once worried about being late. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful. Precise. Maintained. Curated. Ice blonde hair. Cheekbones that could cut glass. Eyes the particular shade of pale blue that photographed magnificently and felt, in person, like being assessed rather than seen. She didn't look at Marcella directly. She looked past her, at the mantelpiece Marcella was polishing, and said, "You've left streaks. Use circular motions." Then she walked out. That was the introduction. The subtlety of Astrid's cruelty was almost impressive. She never raised her voice. Never made a scene. She simply operated with the casual certainty of someone who had decided, long before meeting Marcella, exactly what Marcella was and what Marcella was worth. Useful. Occasionally inadequate. Not worth the energy of genuine contempt. She corrected Marcella's folding technique in front of guests without interrupting her own conversation. She once asked Marcella to repeat herself, just once, in front of her friends, claiming not to understand the accent. Then laughed lightly and said, "Never mind, I think I prefer the mystery." She left instructions on a notepad rather than speaking directly, and when Marcella completed them correctly, said nothing. When she completed them slightly below perfect, Astrid would sigh, just a breath, just enough, and redo the task herself with theatrical patience. It was the sigh that was most deliberate. Marcella recognized it immediately. She'd met women like Astrid before, though usually across boardroom tables rather than marble floors. The sigh was designed to make you feel like a problem someone was graciously absorbing. Designed to shrink you. Marcella let it land every time. She kept her face neutral and her hands steady and filed it all away. Not for revenge. But because she had decided, before she ever arrived, that she would feel everything real about this experience and not insulate herself from any of it. She scrubbed floors. Pressed linen. Polished silver. Said "yes, ma'am" with an expression that revealed nothing. But she was watching everything. The household had its own rhythm. Its own internal weather. Mrs. Choi ran the staff with quiet authority and occasional dry humor. There was a groundskeeper named Seo who arrived before sunrise and left after dark and communicated almost exclusively in nods. 2 young housekeepers who had been there long enough to know which rooms to avoid when Astrid was in a particular mood. A driver who waited in the courtyard and read paperbacks with the dedication of someone working through a personal curriculum. Marcella learned all of them. Their patterns. Their preferences. The small ecosystem of courtesies that kept a household running without friction. She asked Mrs. Choi about her daughter without pushing. She brought Seo tea on cold mornings and left it near him without expecting acknowledgement. Somewhere around the 4th week, she realized something. This was the first time in her adult life she had worked without an agenda visible to the people around her. Every job before this, every project, every meeting, every deal, had been colored by what people thought of her father and what they wanted from his name. Here, she was just a pair of hands. Accountable only to the quality of what she actually did. She found, to her own surprise, that she didn't hate it. She found, more quietly, that she was building something inside herself she hadn't known was missing. A kind of proof. Weightless but absolute. And in the evenings, after her shift ended, she did the other work, the work nobody in that mansion knew about. She reviewed documents on an encrypted laptop locked in her bag. She photographed financial records when she had legitimate access to rooms where correspondence was left. She listened to phone calls she was never meant to hear. Not because she was careless, but because domestic staff become, after enough time, genuinely invisible to the people they serve. And invisible people hear everything. What she found was this: Min Jun's hotel operation was complicated. But it was not corrupt. The irregularities her team had flagged were legacy structures, inherited from an older arrangement he was methodically unwinding. He was meticulous about payroll. Careful with vendors. What she found was not a man hiding something. It was a man trying to rebuild something that had been handed to him already compromised, doing so with more care than the situation required and less credit than the effort deserved. She updated her notes and kept watching. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Marcella was on her hands and knees cleaning the base of a column in the east hallway when Astrid came through with two friends, dressed for lunch somewhere expensive, carrying the specific energy of women who enjoyed being witnessed. Astrid almost walked past entirely before she stopped. She looked down. "Oh, I've been meaning to tell you." The tone she used for mild administrative matters. The same one she used with the florist. "I'm hosting a charity gala on Saturday. At the Beaumont. Black tie." She tilted her head, the faintest smile arranged on her lips. "You should come." One of the friends made a small sound, quickly covered. Marcella sat back on her heels and looked up. "I think it would be fun," Astrid continued, as if Marcella had already responded. "Good for you to see how these things work. Get dressed up. Try." The smile held. "I'll put your name on the list." Marcella held her gaze for a long, steady moment. Long enough that the smile flickered, just slightly. Just a breath of something uncertain underneath it. Then she nodded. "Once. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be there." She returned to the column. Behind her, as they moved down the hall, she heard a voice drop low, then the sound of laughter, quickly muffled. Astrid's heels clicked against the marble and faded into silence. Marcella worked quietly for another 20 minutes. And in her mind, she was already making the call to Lagos. Before we go further, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. It truly means a lot seeing this community grow across every corner of the world. Every subscribe, every comment, it helps us keep telling stories about dignity, self-worth, and the power of knowing exactly who you are. Together. She polished their floors by day. She arrived at their gala in a $5 million Bugatti by night. And nobody in that ballroom will ever be the same. Minjun noticed her on a Wednesday evening, 5 weeks in. She was in the kitchen when he came through. Unusual, since he typically took dinner in his study. He opened the refrigerator, stood in front of it for a moment, then closed it without taking anything. He turned, registered her presence, and said nothing. She continued what she was doing. He poured himself a glass of water. And stayed. This happened 3 more times over the following weeks. He would pass through a room where she was working and simply not leave. Once she caught him watching her from a doorway. No particular expression, just watching. She met his eyes briefly and returned to work, and when she looked again, he was gone. She knew what he was seeing. The small inconsistencies she couldn't fully suppress no matter how carefully she tried. The way she held herself in a room, even while kneeling. The way she evaluated information rather than just received it. Once, she had overheard his financial director on the phone in the hallway. Running a figure she recognized from her own analysis of his hotel group, and she'd made a small sound. Not words. Just a breath of recognition she hadn't been able to swallow fast enough. Minjun had been at the other end of the hallway. She didn't know if he'd heard. She suspected he had. He said nothing directly. But she began to notice that certain documents appeared in common areas more often than before. Not carelessly. Deliberately, she thought. As if someone was offering her something without being willing to admit they were offering it. She could feel the net drawing tighter. He was not the kind of man who left things unresolved. And she had become something in his house that he could not resolve. She had about a week, she estimated. Maybe less. It was enough. The gala was Saturday. The car was confirmed. The diamonds were packed. Everything she had built quietly in the dark was almost ready to step into the light. He found her on Thursday evening. She was in the library, dusting, technically, though she had slowed near the economics section and was reading spines the way you read old friends' names. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Quiet but deliberate. The walk of someone who had decided to do something and was following through before he changed his mind. He closed the door behind him. She turned, cloth in hand, expression neutral. He looked at her. Not the passing glance she'd grown used to, but something more direct. He had the quality of a man who had learned to waste very little, including eye contact. "Sit down," he said. Then, after a beat, "Please." She sat. He remained standing, not as a power gesture, she understood, but as a habit. He thought better on his feet. "You've been in this house for almost 2 months. 7 weeks. 7 weeks. He nodded once. "And in 7 weeks I have not been able to determine who you actually are." She said nothing. "That's not a common experience for me," he added. "I imagine not." He moved to the window. Outside, the garden had gone blue-dark in the early evening, the hedges precise against the fading sky. He kept his back to her, and she had the sense he was deciding how direct to be. He chose direct. "You don't move like someone who has spent their life in service. You process information the way analysts do. Last week in the hallway, when Chung was on the phone discussing the Incheon projections, you reacted to a specific number. Not with surprise. With recognition." Marcella set the cloth on the arm of the chair. "What is it you want to know?" she asked. The truth would be a reasonable starting point. She looked at him for a long moment. Through the window behind him, the last of the evening light was settling into dark. She thought about the answer she'd been carrying for 7 weeks, the one she'd rehearsed and then decided she would never need to give, and found herself giving it now, to this specific man, in this specific room, because something about the quality of his directness made deflection feel like the wrong instrument. "My father is Emeka Dorrance," she said. The room went very quiet. He turned from the window. "I didn't come here because of your operation," she continued. "I came because my portfolio has exposure to Seoul Capital and your hotel group raised questions I couldn't answer from a distance. But that's not the whole reason." She paused. "The whole reason is that I needed to know I could exist without my name opening every door. Without people treating me like a proxy for my father's power. I needed to do real work somewhere no one knew who I was, and find out whether I was actually good at anything. Or just good at being his daughter." Min-jun was very still. "I know how that sounds," she said. "It sounds," he said slowly, "like something only someone who has actually earned something would feel the need to prove." She hadn't expected that. She felt something shift quietly in her chest, not softness exactly, more like the release of a tension she'd stopped noticing she was holding. "Your operation is clean," she said. "The irregularities my team flagged are legacy structures. You're unwinding them carefully. The Incheon projections are conservative but sound." She met his eyes. "I'll be withdrawing the concern flag when I leave." "When you leave," he repeated. "After Saturday." He understood then. She watched him understand it, the gala, the invitation, the geometry of what was coming. Something behind his expression settled into clarity, the way a complicated equation finally resolves. "She doesn't know," he said. Not a question. "No." A pause. "Then, the invitation was meant to humiliate you." "Yes." "And you accepted." "Yes." He looked at her with something that had moved well past curiosity into something closer to genuine respect. Not the obligatory kind. Not the kind extended downward as a courtesy. The level kind, the kind that only moves between equals. "I won't interfere," he said. "I know you won't." He almost smiled. "Is there anything you need?" "Nothing," she said. "It's already arranged." And it was. The Bugatti had been driven up from a private storage facility outside the city, kept under a subsidiary name alongside 2 other cars she never spoke about publicly. Her coordinator confirmed it Thursday morning. Detailed. Fueled. Ready. Matte obsidian finish. The color of something that doesn't need to announce itself. Scissor doors that opened like a statement. $5 million of engineered restraint that somehow still managed to stop every conversation on a clear road. She had considered whether it was too much. She decided, no. The occasion required precision, not modesty. Modesty was what you performed when you were afraid of how power would land. She wasn't afraid. The gown she'd decided on weeks ago, the teal Dior, structured bodice, fluid skirt, the kind of silhouette that read as effortless from across a room and revealed its architecture only up close. Transported in a sealed case alongside the diamonds. A single platinum necklace, stones not large but flawless in the way that only becomes apparent when the light is exactly right. The kind of jewelry that people who knew jewelry would recognize immediately, and say nothing about, out of the particular courtesy of the very wealthy. The investment paperwork she finalized on Friday evening. Sitting cross-legged on her narrow staff-room bed, encrypted laptop open, a cup of tea going cold on the nightstand, the garden quiet outside the window. 12% of Minjun's hotel group, acquired through 3 intermediary vehicles over the preceding 6 weeks, consolidating into a single, clean, irrevocable position. She signed the final documents. Closed the laptop. Finished the tea. She slept well. On Saturday, she worked her full shift. She pressed linen. Restocked the east bathroom. Helped Mrs. Choi inventory the wine cellar. She moved through the house with the same steadiness she'd carried for 7 weeks, unhurried, competent, invisible to the people who had long since decided she was invisible. Astrid swept through the kitchen at noon in a state of orchestrated preparation. Dress chosen, hair appointment confirmed, a running commentary maintained for the benefit of 2 friends who had come to accompany her. She did not acknowledge Marcella. At 4 o'clock, Marcella folded her uniform. Placed it neatly on the bed. Picked up the single bag she would be taking and walked out of the service entrance without drama, exactly the way she had entered. Her coordinator was waiting 2 streets away. The Beaumont sat back from the road behind a long gravel approach lined with light strung through the trees, the kind of venue that understood the value of arrival as theater. By 8 o'clock the red carpet held the city's particular blend of old money and new influence. Women in gowns selected to signal. Men in black tie that ranged from elegant to merely obedient. Photographers at the edges. Staff weaving through with champagne. The low, orchestrated hum of a room performing wealth at itself. Astrid was at the center of it, as she was designed to be. Champagne in hand, gown the color of deep rose, working the room with the practiced ease of a woman who had attended 1,000 versions of this exact evening. Brilliant at it, Marcella had to concede. The warmth deployed at precisely the right temperature. The laughter timed to perfection. The appearance of generosity laid so smoothly over the infrastructure of ambition that you almost couldn't see the join. At 9:15, a sound moved through the gravel at the top of the approach. Not loud. Not aggressive. A low, controlled mechanical exhale, the sound of something with extraordinary power being held deliberately in check. Heads at the top of the steps turned first. Then the effect rippled downward, person by person, the way ripples always move. The Bugatti came forward slowly. Obsidian in the glow of the trees, its finish so deep it seemed to absorb the surrounding light rather than reflect it. It stopped at the base of the carpet with the precision of something choreographed. The doors rose. Not swung. Rose. Both of them, together, opening upward like something unfolding, and in the context of this crowd, this carpet, this evening, the effect was absolute. Phones lifted before anyone had even seen who was inside. The instinct came before the understanding. Marcella stepped out. She took her time. She had learned, in a life spent watching powerful people enter rooms, that speed belongs to people who are uncertain. She straightened to her full height. Let the gown settle. Let the light find the necklace. Then she looked up at the building. And began to walk. The gravel was steady under her heels. The carpet received her. She moved with the quality she had never quite been able to suppress. The one that had unsettled Astrid's friends and made Mrs. Choi study her face and made Minjun close a library door on a Thursday evening. The quality of someone who is exactly where they intended to be. The crowd on the steps had gone very quiet. Then she heard it, a champagne glass slipping. Not shattering. Just the sharp click of crystal meeting stone. And she didn't need to look to know whose hands had been holding it. She found Astrid near the top of the steps, the rose gown luminous under the entrance lights, the practiced smile suspended, the pale blue eyes doing something they were not accustomed to doing. Recalculating. Marcella stopped at a comfortable distance. Close enough to be heard without raising her voice. Far enough to make Astrid close the gap, if she wanted to. She didn't move. Mrs. Min. Warm. Entirely at ease. Thank you for the invitation. This is a beautiful evening. The cluster around Astrid had gone still, the way crowds go still when they sense that what's unfolding is not what they came prepared for. Astrid's voice emerged, then paused. She tried again. Where did you? You mentioned wearing something appropriate, Marcella said pleasantly. I hope this meets the standard. Someone in the cluster made a sound that was quickly converted into something else. A phone that was already raised kept rising. Who are you? Not a question. The grammatical structure of someone whose categories have stopped working. Marcella Dorrance. Said simply. The way you say a thing that has always been true and has simply been waiting for the right room. My father is Emeka Dorrance. Though I prefer, she added, to be introduced by my own work. The name moved through the crowd the way names of a certain weight move, in a wave, person to person, the low sound of recognition compounding into something larger. A man appeared at her shoulder. Silver-haired, 60s, the bearing of serious financial circles. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has been searching for someone for a very long time. Dorrance. I have been trying to reach you for. Henrik. She turned to him briefly. I know. Call my office Monday. She turned back to Astrid. I should mention, she said, in the same pleasant, conversational tone, that as of yesterday I finalized a 12% stake in your husband's hotel group. Which makes me, currently, the second largest individual shareholder. She let that sit for exactly one beat. I look forward to being more involved going forward. The silence was the kind that has texture. Astrid's friends had quietly redistributed themselves to the outer edges of the scene. Which was the social equivalent of a building evacuation. Phones were still raised all around them. And somewhere behind her, Marcella heard a familiar voice, low, dry, with warmth running underneath it, and knew without looking that Min Jun had arrived and was watching from a position of deliberate remove, the way he did everything. You were in my house, Astrid said. Her voice had found a new register. Stripped of the cool authority, stripped of the theatrical warmth, stripped of everything performative. Something raw underneath. You cleaned my floors. I did, Marcella agreed. I do good work. She held Astrid's gaze a moment longer. Not triumphant. Not cold. Just clear, the clarity of someone who has nothing left to prove and has known it for quite some time. Then she smiled. Genuinely. Which was somehow the most devastating thing she could have done. And turned toward the room. She resigned on Monday morning. She placed the folded uniform on Mrs. Choi's desk with a handwritten note of genuine thanks, 3 sentences, specific, meaning every word of it. Mrs. Choi read it in front of her, was quiet for a moment, and then said, I knew from the 3rd day. Marcella said, I know you did. Mrs. Choi embraced her once, brief, complete, and that was that. The public announcement came the following week. Dorrance Capital. Her own vehicle. Fully independent. No family backing. No advisory role held by anyone connected to her father's empire. A focused mandate, patient capital for infrastructure and hospitality ventures in underserved, high-growth markets. The kind of work that doesn't generate immediate headlines but builds things that last. The launch was covered modestly. She had not invited a room full of journalists. Had not engineered a spectacle. She sent a brief statement, held a small private briefing for 3 journalists whose work she respected, and let the numbers do what numbers eventually do. Min Jun called her that same afternoon. "I'd like to discuss terms," he said. "A formal advisory relationship. And potentially co-investment on 2 properties in the pipeline. Send me the details. I'll look at them this week." A pause. The particular quality of a pause from someone deciding whether to say the thing or not. "Marcella." His voice was measured. "Careful. What you're building is going to be significant." "I know," she said. Not with arrogance. With the same quiet certainty she'd felt sitting on the edge of that narrow bed on the very first night, her bag at her feet, the garden outside the window, the relief moving through her like water finding its level. She knew because she'd earned the right to know. Not because of her father's name. Not because of his pipelines and towers and the currency of his reputation across 3 continents. But because she had gone somewhere no one knew her, done the work with her own hands, and come out the other side holding something that belonged entirely to herself. The holding company was registered in her name. The shareholder documents bore her signature alone. The Bugatti was back in storage. She had taken the train to the office that Monday morning. 40 minutes. She spent it reading. Nobody on that train knew who she was. She was perfectly, completely content. Astrid's charitable foundation quietly restructured its board 2 weeks later. 3 of her closest friends declined a subsequent dinner invitation. These were the kinds of consequences that required no engineering and no maintenance. They simply followed, the way consequences always follow when the architecture beneath a performance finally becomes visible to everyone watching. Marcella didn't think about Astrid very much. She thought about Mrs. Choi. About Seo, who had never once asked anything of her and always accepted the tea. About the young housekeepers who had moved through that house every single day with a competence that the people they served had never once paused to acknowledge. She thought about what it meant to be good at something when no one was watching. About how that kind of goodness was its own complete thing. Not diminished by the absence of an audience. Not elevated by one either. She thought about what she wanted Dorrance Capital to stand for. The answer came easily. The same thing. Work that was real. Value that was earned. Respect that moved in both directions, regardless of which side of the desk you happened to be sitting on. She put those words in the founding document. Not buried in the legal language. In the preamble. The part people actually read. Then she went back to work. If this story moved something in you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because Marcella's story is only just beginning. Every subscriber helps us keep telling stories about people who know exactly who they are, even when they're on their knees on someone else's floor. We'll see you in the next one.